Joining me now is former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO and CNN senior military analyst, Admiral James Stavridis. Admiral, you heard my short take. The floor is yours.
I'm going to park on severe consequences. I think that is the ultimate tell. It is whether or not President Trump is going to impose a price on Vladimir Putin for what, clearly was yet another round of rope-a-dope by Putin, just coming in, trying to be charming as a thug like Putin can be, and seeking to kind of tap along the president's words, not mine. So will we impose some sanctions, some consequences, Michael? I think we should. I think there should be military consequences. For example, triple the number of F-16 fighter aircraft. I think there should be economic consequences, secondary sanctions. And let's go after this oil smuggling fleet that Russia is running, starting pounding those vessels. And then thirdly, politically, I would like to see not bringing the Ukrainians directly into NATO. That would be quite explosive, but opening the taps for various forms of NATO cooperation, including with NATO centers of excellence in cyber, air defense, land warfare, for example. So I think there's plenty of arrows in the quiver that President Trump has. The question is, will he get out a bow and start shooting a few toward Moscow?
Okay, so in a nice and gentlemanly like way, you're completely dismissive of me saying maybe there's a glimmer of hope. Because as I think about it, Admiral, how could they have stood on that stage and said, hey, we're in agreement on the most significant of issues? Then everybody would be saying, how can you do that without Zelensky and Ukraine at the table?
I like your thinking. As you said, it's a glass half full. And as the saying goes, from your lips to God's ears, I think the tell in that scenario is going to pop on Monday when we see what the White House meeting looks like between Zelensky and President Trump. Here, I'm kind of with you. I'm hopeful that Zelensky will have learned from his first go-round in the White House. I think President Trump really does want to resolve this crisis. And here's the missing man in the conversation so far that neither you nor I have mentioned. It's the Europeans. Where are they going to land? To what degree can they pull Trump toward that axis of Kyiv, Paris, London, Berlin? That is going to be the thing to watch. The Europeans, as well as the actual meeting Monday. And I hope your scenario comes to pass.
Yeah, I'm not wagering on it. I'm just trying to be fair. And I'm hearing all the criticism. I'm hearing all the criticism. Oh, my God, they rolled out a red carpet, as if he should have kneed him in the groin the minute that he stepped off the plane. I mean, he's trying to cut a deal. President Trump, is trying to cut a deal. I'm willing to give him credit for that so long as he doesn't sell out Ukraine in the process. And there's no suggestion that he's done so at this stage. I want to tap into your expertise as a former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. What's the NATO role in all of this? You mentioned our European allies. Be specific now to NATO.
What I would do in terms of unleashing some of the consequences, I would go to the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, who used to be on my team as a hard-charging colonel when I was Supreme Allied Commander a decade ago. And I'll say to him, okay, General, you're in charge of putting together a task force of the European powers. Doesn't have to necessarily be under a pure NATO flag, but pull the NATO countries together to provide more training for those F-16 pilots, more battlefield advice, more logistics flow into Ukraine, help facilitate the sale of American weapons paid for by the Europeans. How are they going to get into the hands of the Ukrainians? Big role there for NATO. Again, not pulling Ukraine into NATO, but making them a very close and trusted partner. And it's also a short step from there toward Article 5 security guarantees, which I think is what Zelensky ultimately is going to want.
Quick final question. Which of the two big buckets, you and I have spoken on radio that there are these two big buckets, one are boundaries and the other are future security guarantees. Which of the two, if either, do you perceive to be the greater impediment to peace?
I think the security guarantees, because that is what Putin is deeply opposed to. Putin is going to fight with everything he's got to avoid a scenario in which Ukraine is actually free and democratic and isn't essentially a proxy or a vassal of Moscow. So in those conversations we spoke about just a moment ago, White House for Zelensky, the European engagement in these conversations, watch for how the security guarantees land. The borders, that's a deal. We can cut that. But the issue that's going to be the challenge are the security guarantees.
Admiral, we always appreciate your being here. Thank you so much for your expertise.